Well, it's really nice to be here this Sunday morning. This is a perfect topic, I think, for today. And I'm realizing in this moment in a mostly empty room that it's going to require me to have a little faith that there's someone on the other side of that camera that I'm actually talking to. Faith. It's a powerful topic, and I think especially on the heels of Easter, we see really what we're up against right now in the world, and the opportunity we have for faith to be really our life raft, or our faith goes if our faith is put in the right place. And when our faith is not in the places that maybe serve us, we see how quickly that life raft becomes just a sinking ship, and we don't actually have anything to float on anymore. What I'm saying here is that Swami, in this reading, gives us an incredible interpretation of what faith really is. And maybe before I say what that is, I'll just backtrack a little bit to my own kind of growing understanding of faith, as it's not always been something that I've understood. I'm not even sure if I totally understand it right now. But growing up kind of where I did in the middle of the country, and even having some experience with Jesus as a child, I quickly, as I grew older, started to recognize that our version of faith within contemporary Christianity and in much of modern religion doesn't really offer us much, does it? The idea that Jesus came and we're just going to believe in him and ride his coattails to heaven, but not really have to change any of our own habits, really upset me when I was about 12 years old. And I was talking to some of my family in the Ozarks, and evangelical as they are, they love Jesus. And I've always taken that love of Jesus that they have and recognized that there's something that they have there. It's actually true. And yet, the time that they told me that all those people who didn't have Jesus in their hearts were going to hell when I was 12 years old, I thought, this is absurd. And I got in an argument with my older cousin and her husband, and they were maybe 20. And it was quite that has been indelibly stamped in my head. And it took me about 10 years to recover from this idea of having faith in something that we don't actually know inside of ourselves. It's a strange thing, really. But as we start to actually grow spiritually, we start to experience faith in a different way. And for me, the last few years has been one of incredible compounding faith, just growing inside of myself as an actual experience of life, not as some blind belief that I have to fall back on because I'm desperate, even though that happens too. But as an actual experience of faith being a reflection of our own state of consciousness. It's like, what are we invested in this world and in this life? And that investment that we put inside of ourselves, in our relationship to God, that comes back to us in this faith. And so for some of us, we put our faith in our jobs, and we say, okay, as long as I make X amount of money, everything's going to be secure. We put our faith in a relationship, and everything is great in this relationship, so our faith is strong until it falls apart. We put our faith in all kinds of things in this world, all these belief systems, all this ways of being that are worldly. And then what inevitably happens to each one is they all fall away. And we realize that my faith should have never been there in the first place, except to the extent that I recognized God was the one behind every circumstance, behind every person, behind every job, behind every sense of security that I had in this world. That's the true sense of faith, is bringing everything back to that source of God. So what Swami says is our faith is the attractive power of our underlying state of consciousness. That faith is not passive at all. It's actually exactly who we are is how we experience faith in our life. There's that saying, keep the faith. And I kind of thought about that this week, keep the faith. And oftentimes we'll fall back on that when we need something. And I thought, what are we actually saying when we say keep the faith? And what does it feel like if we have no faith? It's like, what if we've not invested ourselves, if we made no investment in anything? It's pretty hopeless. Even if it was that job that we were invested in, it gave us the outlet to have hope, to have something to put our energy towards. But as those things fall away, we can arrive at this place of not having any piggy bank that we've invested in, having nothing. And I, in my own growth, inevitably arrived at that place in myself where I went from, as a child, absolutely being in love with nature, having experiences with Jesus, everything falling away, and believing in nothing. And this is a common sickness right now in our world, this nihilism. And Swami Kriyananda talks about it and documents it very well in Out of the Labyrinth, how we've arrived at the place that we've arrived at right now as a collective consciousness. And it's not a fun place to be, but we start to gradually wake up from that too. And for some of us, it's exactly what we have to go through, this place of nothingness and believing in nothing, so that we can ask the big questions. We can start asking ourselves, what do I believe in? What is important in my life? And what is the reason that I'm here? These are fundamental questions about what it means to be a human. What we start to realize is that the things that we actually believe in and that we invest in are the things that feed us. And so we have to make the right investments, don't we? It's up to us to start choosing to actually invest not just the ideals of what we think is God, but every aspect of our life in those ideals and the application of them, if we truly want to realize God. In the farmhouse in the last couple of weeks, we have started at breakfast, started playing Yahtzee. And we play, it's fun. And sometimes it gets a little too rowdy, I would say. I'm looking at some of the farmers in the room right now, William specifically. It gets a little rowdy. But even in Yahtzee, when we roll those dice, and when we actually look for the lessons behind what's happening, we can find God's presence everywhere. And I noticed an interesting phenomenon as we've introduced Yahtzee to the farm and then to a couple other friends in the last few weeks, that a common initial response when we're going to roll those dice is to say, it's all luck. It doesn't matter. And then we start to roll the dice. And what I've noticed is for the people who say it's all luck, as soon as they start rolling the dice, they have this choice to make. Am I really going to roll these dice and not root for that fifth 5 to get a Yahtzee right now? Or am I going to believe in that 5 and magnetize that Yahtzee? And it's amazing because it's almost universal, that inclination to choose to believe in it when you're confronted with it, to choose to believe in the power of the Yahtzee. It's amazing. Even though just that same person 2 games ago, before we had started, it was all luck. There was no power in my own thoughts. I couldn't control any of it. And suddenly, I've got Parto here using the dead eye in his hand, staring at these dice and flicking them out into a Yahtzee. The power of our thoughts is real, and it has the power to change our whole perception of the world around us, of everything that's going on in the world right now. It's a confusing time if we listen to the voice of the world right now, because nobody really knows what the heck is going on or where it's going. I have little stomach for science at this point, when every time I hear an article or see a scientist telling me that we don't have enough research to know anything yet, and then they proceed to tell me everything that I need to be afraid of, even though they just said they didn't know anything. We're confronted with a choice that's not so much whether to wear a mask or not. Definitely wear your mask in public. We're confronted with a choice inside of ourselves about how we feel about life. Is this virus something we need to, all of us, focus our thoughts on every day and think about all the time and figure it out? This is the trap of Maya, is it not? That we're going to figure everything out, that we're going to get all the details lined out, and it's all just going to work. Or should we know that this is Shiva? Could it be anything but Shiva? Is everything God? Or is this an exception? I think about what's going on today and how much it tests each one of us in our relationship to faith and to God. Where do our thoughts go when the news comes on? What do we think about from minute to minute, hour to hour? The last 2 months at the farm, has it been 2 months? Time has kind of escaped me. However long Navashan has been here, maybe a month. The last month at the farm has been incredible in many ways, because what we've been seeing is that if we actually don't listen to those voices all the time, sure, we need to be aware and we need to do the right things. If we don't listen to those voices all the time, we have God in creation smiling on us right now in this very moment. The nicest spring that I can remember since I've been in Washington has been this one. Absolutely magnificent. God's presence in everything, as it always is, but especially bright right now, for us to just wake up to that reality. I read an article the other day by a friend, and she commented about sitting at her window and observing the beauty of nature, and then wondering about this, if this was a false sense of security she was feeling because the threat that we're up against. And I thought about that, and I've wondered about that. Should I not feel God's joy in nature right now because I need to be concerned with the virus? Is that the higher path? Or do my thoughts need to be ever more firmly rooted in God's presence in everything? Maya is always pulling us away from God, always convincing us, whether it's good or bad, that we can't think about God right now. We have to think about making plans and figuring it out and doing all the million things that life tells us we have to do. I don't know if that's true. I know that when I keep my mind on God, and when I look out that window and I see God's presence, and when I'm in the garden and I hear it and I feel it, that feels good. Good enough for me to be secure in that relationship. Really, when I think about where we're at right now today, I don't know that the virus is even the most important thing. It's that the whole world has arrived at this single point together of asking ourselves, how are we supposed to live on this planet? This has not been working. Now, we're at varying degrees of understanding of how well it's been working and how much we miss what we miss and how much we just prefer things to go back to normal. But almost universally across time and space and culture right now, across all people, there's an awareness that we need to make some changes to going forward. And when I reflect on that, I get so much gratitude for what this path specifically represents. Ananda. And what Master Yogananda brought into this world was this vision. When we ask that question of what does it mean to be a human, we have at Ananda the most simple maxim there is: simple living and high thinking. And when I apply that to how we're actually supposed to be living, I see, meet your basic needs with your spiritual family and your own relationship to nature. and realize that God is in everything and everyone. That's the simple and the high, all together as packaged as one, and we call it Ananda. And right now what we see is that this is the solution not just for us, but for the whole world, to simplify our lives and to realize that God will manifest however God wishes to manifest through Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. And that's not really up for us to say it's good or bad. It just is the way that it is. I wanted to backtrack for 1 second, and when I think about this integration of the spiritual life and the highest ideals with how we live on the planet in the most basic ways, I often go back to Martin Luther King Jr. And a few years ago, Haley and I, maybe more than a few now, went to Laurelwood to visit Jacob and Sharon at the time. And it was during Martin Luther King weekend when Fremont had hosted for years a celebration of Martin Luther King's life at East West. And I've always just been so amazed by that last speech that he gave the night before he died, of which we would often play a snippet at the celebration. And after we had watched Selma, which had come out at the time earlier in the day, we live streamed what we could of the program. And then all four of us sat together and listened to Martin Luther King's full last speech, which was very fascinating because we're all familiar with the power that comes out of him at the end when he says, "I've been to the mountaintop. I might not get there with you, but I'm here to tell you I've been there, and we're all going to get there. And I've seen the coming of the Lord." And you see the Spirit in his eyes, and you realize God's presence in him tangibly. And I thought, what does he say leading up to that? And interestingly enough, that night, he is speaking to the garbage union, and I think it was Memphis, and obviously the African American community. His focus towards the end had shifted a little more from just the civil rights to poverty at large and embracing everyone who was universally affected by that. And I was amazed to hear him tell the people that even the African Americans in the room, if you pooled all of your wealth, you're one of the top 10 wealthiest nations in the whole world. But where do you spend your money? What do you do every day? Coca-Cola and Pepsi? That's where you give the little money that you have? And he called them out on their habits each and every day. What do you choose in your life? What do you support? Where do you put your faith? This is the power that we actually have, each one of us, in every aspect of our life, is to tune into it and find out what is the superconscious solution for how I meet my basic needs, for how I support my community. Fred Meyer is great and convenient, but do we think that that's the solution going forward? There's a line from the Raja text from Swami when he talks about cleanliness as a virtue, and he says, spiritual growth happens not when we learn to cope with the world, but when we learn not to depend on it. That's a declaration of independence. And that's really where we're at right now. That's the threshold we've arrived at as a whole. Are we going to continue to depend on the world to provide our needs for us? Or we're going to wait in line and think that all of our food is going to come from the magical box stores? Or are we going to empower ourselves to really represent spirituality and nature together in harmony as one? This is the path that's laid out before us. This is the opportunity that's given to us. And it's actually amazing. And so I feel in some ways how at the farm we've had a dual reality for the last month. The core group of us has continued to just be together because we're a family and we've been together. And we work every day together. We grow the farm, we take care of the animals, we have building projects, we meditate together, We satsang together. We make all our meals together. You'd think we'd be sick of each other. But as far as I know, we're not. And it's because we have something that we believe in together. And we have an infinite amount of energy, as much as we need, as so long as we believe it. And this is all of our opportunity. Right now, we have to do the things that we have to do. If we can't leave, we can't leave. And yet, each one of us could make a meal for our neighbor. Each one of us could choose all the little things to tune in and do the right thing. When I project this out over the next however amount of time, I have no idea what's going to happen in the world. And the truth is, a huge part of me just doesn't care. Because what we've been given is the formula for how to live here, regardless of what happens. The necessity is what will force the world to make these changes. But we know as Ananda, as devotees, and as those with faith in God, that only joy will sustain it. Only joy can do that. So our job then is to find the joy in all the simple things of life again. All those universal things that we all share. What a great rallying cry. What a great point to find our commonness and serve everyone through Ananda, through joy. I think I'm probably running out of time here. When I think about faith, and I just want to kind of close with this concept of bringing the faith into our life, we have had the opportunity to be watching Jesus of Nazareth off and on for the last couple weeks. And there's the scene where the centurion comes to Christ, to Jesus, and this is a Roman captain, for lack of a better word, someone high up in the Roman army who comes to Jesus in the temple. And this is, of course, very controversial for the Jews that were sitting there at the time for Christ to even listen to him, much less want to help him. And when the centurion comes up, he says, I have a son who's very sick, and I know who you are. And Jesus says, shall I come to see him? And he says, oh no, I know who you are. You don't actually have to come. I know if you say it, it will be so. And Christ says to him, your faith has saved your son, go home. And sure enough, all he has to do is head back out, and there's the other soldiers waiting for him to tell him, he is risen, he's healed. And Christ said, your faith has saved your son. And this is us. You know, we can fall into the traps over and over again that this world sets up for us so ingeniously. But at the end of every time, when we crawl back out of that trap, we just give it right back to Christ. Give it right back to Christ consciousness and the masters. You know, when I also kind of ponder this moment in time, I asked Haley the other day about what was going on. And she actually responded to me with a question and said, what if God needed this to happen to stop the world from doing what it's doing, to save Mother Nature? What if this was the only way that we would all stop? And I thought, what a powerful thought that is for Shiva to come through and actually make us stop what we're doing and realize what we're doing. And what if the only way to save Mother Nature is by changing ourselves? We were supposed to go on pilgrimage next week to Italy and Spain, where we were going to visit the barefoot saints, I like to call them, of St. Francis and St. Teresa and St. John. And one thing that those three all had in common that I just can't help but notice right now is that they were the great reformers of their time. They led reformations. And what were the reformations? Poverty, simplicity, God consciousness. I think the Reformation is here. And when we think about what Reformation means, it means reform. The forms are falling away. So it's time for us to reform them in the ways that are actually going to serve humanity going forward. So that's my wish, that we all feel that faith actually as a tangible understanding inside of ourselves. Because that's where the power will come from for us to really change the world. Not just as an ideal, but as an actual knowing of what our Dharma is in this life and actually doing it. So may the faith be with you. God bless you. I'm going to close with a reading from Whispers. This is called Make Me the Eagle of Progress. Make me an eagle of progress, soaring far above narrow lanes of bigotry. Call me to soar ever higher and higher, far above all clouds of earthly pettiness. With the sharp talons of my soul, I will tear at the little squabbling birds of misery which prey upon mankind. I will free my mind's skies from the buzzards of cynicism which prey on carcasses of dead hopes. I will soar on balanced wings of wholesome living, high up into the finest regions of divine perception, high above the hurricanes of earthly preoccupation. I will soar higher and higher to those unimagined heights where thou alone dost dwell. Make me thy eagle of ever upward progress. Jai Guru.